Hey, what's up everybody out there and across the plane in YouTube land? John the Morgile here, back for a quick video. This is just something that I'm sort of doing ad hoc. I may try to cut in some diagrams and that sort of thing, but this is nothing scripted. It was just one of these typical things that we run into as static planers, flat earthers. Just sort of on my lunch break today, for shits and giggles, I Google searched flat Earth from my phone, and one of the first top one or the second one, result that came up was this Popular Science article. And of course, Popular Science is PopSci, POPSCI.com. It's fairly popular, hence the name, I reckon. Pop science. Anyway, the name of the article, and I'll put a link in the description, or I'll try to remember to, but it's pretty easy to find. 10 easy ways you can tell for yourself the Earth isn't flat. So, when I see this sort of thing, I'm expecting it's always the 10 same, things. There's never anything different. It's always the same regurgitated assumptions and misunderstandings of physical laws and theory that is bent towards a Copernican principle, or bent towards the idea that there's nothing special or unique or central about planet Earth. So the Copernican principle is almost a law of theoretical physics, to where any evidence or observations or repeatable experiments that show uh, reality to be contrary to this Copernican principle, it's simply rejected. Anyway, not to go off too much on a tangent, but I thought that this was pretty funny. I got a good laugh out of it. So what I'll do is I'll read through the article, and there are, of course, ads. So hopefully I won't have to do too much editing here. But okay, so and I'll just read the whole thing. Again, this is a popsci.com article. Humanity has known the Earth to be round for a few millennia. A few millennia. So I think 2 is a couple, and maybe 3 is a few. Any 3 and beyond is a few. So they're claiming that for at least 3,000 years, people have known the Earth was round. And I love the way they use the term round. They should use spherical or globular or spheroidal, right? But anyway, they claim that for a few millennia, people have known this, which is ridiculous. Um, you know, that's a major stretching of the truth. So right off the bat, it's fairly obvious that this article is going to be bent towards straight up lies, stretching of the truth, and then of course the typical regurgitation of everything that we're used to hearing. So, anyway, humanity has known the Earth to be round for a few millennia, and I've been meaning to show more methods that prove the world is not flat. I've had a few ideas on how to do that, but recently got an interesting incentive when Phil Plait, the bad astronomer, wrote about a recently published BBC article about the Flat Earth Society. And just stopping right there, as most people that are familiar with this topic know, the Flat Earth Society is a misinformation campaign. Essentially, what they do is they claim to be flat Earth proponents, and they put, maybe a few good flat Earth arguments in there, not many, and they just come up with ridiculous garbage. And claim that these are flat Earth belief systems, like, if boats sail too far, they'll go off the edge. Gravity, in quotes, is caused by the Earth accelerating upwards at 9.8 meters per second squared. The Flat Earth Society is just sort of this trap. It's a funnel for people who are sort of lazy researchers. And I guess if you work for Popular Science, you can just be a lazy researcher and let the Flat Earth Society do your research for you, which is typically the case. And I'm not necessarily claiming that that's what this author has done. But if they're pointing directly to the Flat Earth Society right off the bat, then obviously they're way out in left field in terms of what their understandings are of the truth, which is the Earth is a stationary plane and the things that prove it, and also the things that disprove or debunk the spherical heliocentric Earth model, right? So anyway, the bad astronomer wrote about a recently published BBC article about the Flat Earth Society. Most recently, rapper B.O.B. went on a Twitter rant on the topic. Phil claims it's ridiculous to even bother rebutting the Flat Earth Society, and I tend to agree. And I personally would tend to agree because, again, it's ridiculous that they should not be even looked at. They are there to discredit the truth. They bring up red herring arguments in order to make the whole thing seem stupid. So there you have that. Phil claims it's ridiculous to even bother rebutting Flat Earth Society. I tend to agree. But the history of our species, plural, intellectual pursuit is important and interesting, and it's very much well worth writing about. You don't need to denounce all science and knowledge to believe in a kooky conspiracy theory to enjoy some historical factoids about humanity's quest for space. And I'm going to read that last sentence again because I think that sums up the ignorance and the sort of position of totally being misinformed that most people approach this topic from. So that, again, that last sentence, but the history of our species' intellectual pursuit is important and interesting, and it's very much well worth writing about. You don't need to denounce all science and knowledge and believe in a kooky conspiracy theory to enjoy some historical factoids about humanity's quest for space. Now, I'll just point out really, really quickly that the kooky conspiracy theory is the heliocentric globe Earth model, where we live stuck to the side of a spinning sphere, spinning over 1,000 miles an hour east at the equator, dropping 135 miles an hour vertically along that curve at the equator, while spinning half the speed as the hour hand on a clock at the North Pole, allegedly on the hypothetically spinning spherical Earth, which there's no proof of that, and there's no proof of curvature. But anyway, so some of these factoids about humanity's quest for space, and I think that's a good way to put it, because it's almost a never-ending quest for space, where NASA has been making, well, essentially cheap B videos and pushing them off to the general public as scientific documentation of space travel. when in reality, we know for sure that space is not what we've been taught. And this is very simply illustrated by the fact that the North Star remains fixed above the northern axis, the axis of rotation in the heliocentric model. This would be impossible for any any long-term duration due to the so-called precession of the equinoxes or axial precession. We should not have the same North Star Polaris in the central position all the time, essentially forever. And furthermore, we can prove that the universe is not what we think it is because, and I'll put up a diagram here, but during the summer, and this is based on the heliocentric model where you have a Milky Way galaxy with an equator that the sun essentially goes around in a 250 million year cycle at about 500,000 miles an hour, essentially on that galactic equator on a single plane around the galaxy. Okay, and so in this diagram here, it shows the points that I was trying to make, and so hopefully this will illustrate that a little bit better. By the way, it is not to scale. But as you can see here, this is just sort of a very generic galactic equator here. So this represents the so-called galactic equator in the heliocentric model, where the majority of the stars go around in circles over, hundreds of millions of year cycles. You'll notice that summer is represented here, and winter 6 months later is represented here. And again, the Earth is supposedly on opposite ends of the sun during these two seasons. So what we'll see here in the example of summer is that visible space is south and west of the galactic equator if we're thinking of this axis here as north and south. But yeah, visible space in the summer should be southwest of the galactic equator, and visible summer during the winter should be northeast of the galactic equator. And yet, we see all of the same stars year-round from somewhere on Earth, which is physically impossible in the heliocentric model. The other point that you'll sort of notice, and this doesn't happen from summer to winter, this happens, or this should happen every month in the heliocentric model, but the moon, for example, in the summer example here, this would be a full moon. And in the winter example here, this would be a no moon. And so what you'll find is that in this winter example, in the no moon phase, is that the no moon phases, or the phases leading up to no moon, and then the waxing phases up to about a half, up to the half moon phase, should be only visible during the daytime. Because, by the way, this little ellipsis here, this little area here, the blue area on the Earth, represents daytime. Obviously, we all know you can't see the stars during the day, but you can see the moon during the day, of course. And so what this means is that you should only see the moon during the day for about half of each month, every single month, and we know that the moon can be seen at night all month. And not necessarily as it should be in this example. For about 14 days out of each month in these specific phases, you should only see the moon during the day. And furthermore, I would also point out that the lunar eclipse phenomenon should be extremely, extremely likely. We should have far more lunar eclipses than we do solar eclipses, simply because of the conditions involved with the two. And yet, over a 100-year period, you'll find just about the same number of solar and lunar eclipses. So, again, this little diagram here, there's nothing fancy to it. And no, you don't have to have this in 3D, because there are only two planes. The one plane being the galactic equator. So you can sort of think of, this area here, essentially in a 2D environment, this area here as north of the galactic equator, and I'll just make it some color so you can see what I'm talking about. So that would be sort of north of the galactic equator, and down here would be, of course, south of the galactic equator. And so, as you can clearly see, we should have unique stars. Thanks a lot. As you can clearly see, we should have unique stars according to the season, and yet that simply is not the case. So this one or this series of things here completely debunks the heliocentric model. One simple diagram. If you could possibly take the time to stop Skyping me. No, if you could possibly take the time to consider this, you'll know for sure that the heliocentric model is wrong yet again in so many different ways from a simple diagram. I also mentioned the whole idea of orbital mechanics is physically impossible. So let's pull it, while I've got this diagram out, let's pull up another scenario. If the Earth is traveling in this way, well, look at the redraw problems. And I suppose I should go ahead and group this to that as well. To the top. Okay. So the Earth is moving this way, right? At the same time, once a month, the moon is coming around this way, much more slowly than the Earth, yet necessarily much more swiftly than the Earth. But at this point here, the moon is traveling directly in front of or in line with the Earth's alleged path of orbit. And so necessarily every single month, because you got to remember, the moon's zipping around this curve, and it would essentially have to sort of stand still in space to keep its average speed around the Earth, and it would actually have to retrograde to keep its average speed around the Earth consistent, because again, the Earth is constantly in motion this way. Objects moving in opposite directions necessarily have a higher relative difference in speed. And so, anyway, but the point that I was trying to make here is that every month, especially if you're considering gravity in the heliocentric model, is a constant tugging inward of the moon towards the Earth. If the moon is going about 2,200 miles an hour this way, and the Earth is racing 66,600 miles an hour that way, you should necessarily have a collision with the moon every month. So yeah, the heliocentric model, it doesn't work. And so, and this is something that all of science has been working on, all of astronomy, theoretical physics. We base all of our assumptions that build our paradigm on all of this. But it doesn't work. And they've had hundreds of years, and according to popular science, several or a few millennia to get this thing right, and yet it's almost as if no one has ever skeptically scrutinized this model. It's almost just as if everyone has assumed this model to be true and never really has taken the time to inspect it logically. And it is completely illogical no matter how you look at it. I mean, this is going far beyond the lack of curvature and axial rotation, which there's no evidence for, and in fact, a world full of evidence that the Earth is a stationary plane. But, you know, you have to take it this far because there is so much hyperbole, there's so much conjecture, and there's just literally volumes and volumes of books and entire careers based on this sort of model where the Earth is a sphere spinning around the sun. And so you have well-paid, you know, very smart, highly educated people who this is sort of attached to their identity, it's attached to their ego, it's attached to their paycheck. And so, and of course, you have so much propaganda, anti-flat Earth propaganda that works so well, and entities such as Popular LIE-ence are a good example of this propaganda. Now, the Earth and the other planets themselves, or the Earth specifically, supposedly orbit the Sun at a 60-degree angle to that plane. So the ecliptic, or the plane which the Earth revolves around the Sun, is allegedly 60 degrees inset into the galactic equator. Okay, and so what this means is, since obviously we cannot observe the stars during the daytime, only during the nighttime, and in this diagram, in this specific condition, um, visible space would be northwest of the galactic equator during, say, the summer, and 6 months later during the winter, visible space would be southeast of the galactic equator. Which means we should have a completely different set of stars and constellations from winter to summer, as well as spring and autumn. But just, we'll just say winter to summer in this example, because of this fact. You can't get around it. There's no way impossible that you could have all of the same stars and constellations be visible from some point on Earth all year round, forever, and again have the North Star Polaris remain fixed above the axis. It's physically impossible in the heliocentric model. Furthermore, based on this same principle, the no moon cycle, so when the moon is waning and goes to no moon, then new moon, during that entire cycle, the moon should only be visible during the daytime, and never during that specific phase of the moon should it be visible during the nighttime, and yet we see these phases all the time at night. And I'll show up sort of another diagram to explain that. But so the point that I'm trying to make here is that what popular science and what basically all people think of as the universe, and the solar system and what lies beyond the Earth and beyond the planets, and what's out there, this infinite vacuum, this void of space which doesn't actually exist and couldn't possibly exist adjacent to our atmosphere, that's not enclosed by any sort of tanker, high pressurized steel tanker, as far as I know, in the heliocentric model. So this infinite void of space and time doesn't work in theory. In reality, can you replicate that? Can you replicate or duplicate a vacuum being adjacent to a some body of gas without a solid structure separating the two? No, you can only have a vacuum in an enclosed off environment, and any time that you allow back and forth pressure between a pressurized environment and a vacuum, the pressurized environment will always travel to the vacuum. So anyway, and of course, people claim that gravity, the weakest of the natural forces, is what causes this to happen, but it doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't. So on we go to the top 10 ways to know that the Earth is unequivocally, absolutely, positively, 100% not flat. I got to tell you, Popular LIE-ence, I mean, what did they get? Like, I don't know, a middle school student to write this article? I mean, seriously. Okay, so and maybe I should do a screen record on this. I'll go ahead and do a screen record on this. Number one, the moon. Now that humanity knows quite positively that the moon is not a piece of cheese, and, isn't that just so typical to throw ridiculous claims into this mix, to liken the fact that the Earth is a stationary plane to the belief at some point that people thought the moon was made of cheese, I reckon. So right off the bat, you can tell that this article is designed to make people think that this whole concept is stupid. And I'm sorry to say, people fall for this. It's sad, but people are very suggestible, and when they read something like this, the writer here is implanting right off the bat. They're sort of associating this topic with the idea that the moon is made of cheese. So you can sort of see where they're leading people with this. And you know, I thought that science was supposed to be about experimentation, but anyway. So the moon is not a piece of cheese or a playful god. The phenomenon that accompany it from its monthly cycles to lunar eclipses are well explained. And I would say that they are well explained in the heliocentric model as well as the flat Earth model. Um, there are still some mysteries to the moon and to the cycles of the moon, and you know that's sort of a topic uh, in and of itself, and maybe even a novel, you know, a book, right? But I would argue that the phenomenon with the moon are fairly well explained in the flat Earth model, and they actually do not make the explanations of the moon's cycles and eclipses do not make any sense in the heliocentric model. Again, one reason being is that the waning to no moon to new moon phases, that whole, you know, I don't know, 13 to 14 days of each month, the moon should only be visible during the daytime, and that's just based on the heliocentric setup. If you actually map this thing out and think about what you're looking at, you'll realize that this would necessarily be the case, and yet their model for the moon and what the moon's doing does not work. Whether the moon is reflected sunlight or not, there are some good theories to explain it in the flat Earth model, but we won't go quite into that yet. So they say that it's well explained. It was quite a mystery to the ancient Greeks, though, and in their quest for knowledge, they came up with a few insightful observations that helped humanity figure out the shape of our planet. And I do want to quickly mention, you know, we go with the top 10 ways to know that the Earth is unequivocally, absolutely, positively, 100% not flat. Number one is the moon, an object that, according to them, is 250,000 miles away. According to the flat Earth model, is 3,000 miles away. Although I think that these both of these distances are questionable simply because of the atmosphere acting as a lens. And so, if you study high altitude weather balloon footage, you'll notice that the moon appears much, much smaller from elevations above the troposphere than it does from on the ground, and that's because the atmosphere behaves as sort of a lens, and it magnifies, especially the moon. Okay, so but isn't it funny that to prove the shape of the Earth, they point to a totally unrelated body? Um, that would be like me saying, I can prove to you that bowling pins are spherical because the bowling ball is spherical. I mean, does that make sense? Or it would even be better to say something like, I can prove to you that ducks are made out of wood because they float on water, right? I mean, it's just two unrelated things. You can't point to some unrelated object, you know, way over here to prove what's going on over here. You can make assumptions. You can assume that the moon is a sphere, which it may be, but I would argue that even if the moon is a sphere, that has nothing to do with where you're standing, which is on the ground, in reality, on the stationary plane that's never moved a single yard ever. Aristotle, who made quite a lot of observations about the spherical nature of the Earth, and I would correct that and say made quite a lot of assumptions about the spherical nature of the Earth, noticed during lunar eclipses when the Earth's supposed, and I'm going to add, the Earth's supposed orbit places it directly between the sun and the moon, creating a shadow in the process. The shadow on the moon's surface is round. This shadow is the Earth's and is a great clue on the spherical shape of the Earth. Now, one thing that I would mention really quickly that falsifies yet again the heliocentric model in terms of lunar eclipses, whatever they are. If it was a heliocentric model, the moon essentially, we spoke earlier about the galactic equator and the ecliptic, which is the plane, the constant plane relative to the sun, which the Earth supposedly revolves around the sun. The moon, more or less, revolves around the same plane, or revolves around the ecliptic, yet its supposed orbit is allegedly offset to that by about 5 degrees, so not by very much. And so, based on simple geometry and how light and shadows work, we should have total lunar eclipses nearly every month, if not every single month. And I'll throw up some diagrams to show you what I mean here. But in fact, lunar and solar eclipses are just as likely. So over the course of 100 years, you'll see somewhere on Earth, you'll experience there will be uh, roughly the same number of lunar and solar eclipses over the period of 100 years. Now, to me, this is extremely damning evidence against the heliocentric model because of the nature of the two phenomenon. In terms of a solar eclipse, you're talking about the moon threading the proverbial needle to come directly in between the far, far distant sun and an observer on the Earth. On the other hand, with the lunar eclipse, uh, the moon should pass within the Earth's shadow and should be eclipsed nearly every month, if not every month. Okay? But again, in reality, the two are, they happen about the same number of times, maybe one or two off over 100 years. And furthermore, they go in cycles, in predictable 18-year cycles. So this is all, it doesn't really jive well with the heliocentric model. Now, one thing a lot of people are going to ask is, well, what is your explanation of lunar eclipses? And, we've kicked a few things around, but my answer to that would be it is irrelevant because the Earth itself is proven quite nicely to have no curvature over many, many miles, as it should, even over standing water or over the ocean. If you can see a lighthouse that's 100 miles away or 60 miles away, or if you look at the now famous picture from Joshua Nowicki of the Chicago skyline from Grandmere State Park, it's nearly 60 miles. And these objects, these lighthouses, these buildings should be, in the case of the Chicago skyline from Grandmere State Park, the tops of those skyscrapers should be about a quarter mile below the horizon. So the simple fact is there's no curvature. That's proven all sorts of different ways. You can prove it many ways. Visually, what I just described is one. Also, if you watch weather balloon footage ascending, tens and tens of thousands of feet, many, many miles into the air, 20 miles, 30 miles, even greater into the air. Felix Baumgartner, I think, went up to 137,000 feet. They used some nice fisheye lenses to make the Earth seem spherical. But in fact, what you'll notice is that the horizon line never drops as altitude is gained, as it should were the Earth a sphere. The horizon level raises with the observer very gracefully because the Earth is a plane. It's simple geometry. The higher you gain in altitude above a sphere, the lower you would have to look down to see curvature. So, without curvature, the Earth simply isn't a sphere. We can also prove that it's not spinning, so the entire heliocentric model is just way out the window. I mean, it's been fully debunked. It doesn't describe our reality at all. Yet, once in a while, the moon gets obscured by a shadow. And by the way, the sun and moon have on several occasions been documented in the same sky during a total lunar eclipse. And explain that one, right? Um, it just doesn't make any sense. So anyway, the proof, pointing to the moon as proof of the Earth being a sphere and this shadow on the moon that occurs once in a while when technically it should happen like all the time, and solar eclipses should be very, very rare in the heliocentric model, and yet they happen, almost exactly the same number of times over a 100-year period. So pointing to the moon as being hypothetically spherical. Oh, and yes, the Apollo astronauts, they hopped around on the moon, or was it a set? Yes, it was a set. They didn't go to the moon. That was a lie. They tricked the entire world into believing that they went to the moon, and it worked. Sort of lost my train of thought there. My stupid phone recorded for 22 minutes and then ran out of space. Great. Okay, so we were about finished up with the whole moon thing anyway, and how it doesn't prove anything about Earth. It's irrelevant to the shape and nature of the Earth, and anyone who argues that the moon is a sphere, therefore the Earth is a sphere, is ridiculous. And anyone who argues eclipses or lunar eclipses prove that the Earth is a sphere has never really scrutinized the heliocentric model much. Continuing on with the article, a sequential view, and that's this image here, sequential view of the lunar eclipse that occurred April 15th, 2014. You can see Earth's shadow crossing the face of the moon, and the shadow shape is curved because the Earth is spherical. Okay. That really doesn't make any sense. That's assuming that the Earth is what's obstructing the light, reflected light from the sun. If that is what moonlight is, way too many assumptions here. You have to assume that the Earth is a sphere to accept this as proof that the Earth is a sphere, right? Just like all the other stuff. So, since the Earth is rotating according to the heliocentric model, see the Foucault pendulum experiment for a definite proof if you're doubtful, which the Foucault pendulum experiment doesn't prove a thing. But if you're doubtful, the consistent oval shadow it produces in each and every lunar eclipse proves that the Earth is not only round but spherical, absolutely, utterly, beyond the shadow of a doubt, not flat. That's ridiculous. The claims that they're making here are the typical same old claims that are really easily debunked, and they really don't even have to be debunked because, again, if the Earth is shown to have no curvature or axial rotation, then all of these arguments are moot points, and we need to start looking at new models, honestly. Number 2. This is a big surprise. Ships in the horizon. If you've been next to a port lately or just strolled down a beach and stared off vacantly into the horizon, you must have perhaps noticed very interesting phenomenon. Approaching ships do not just appear out of the horizon like they should if the world was flat, but rather emerge from beneath the sea. And just stopping that really quick here, that it has been shown to be the operation of perspective. There is no curvature at sea. If you watch a ship, merge with the horizon or appear to dip beneath the horizon with the naked eye several miles out, with a good set of binoculars, then that ship will be restored. And if you continue to watch that ship go out with the binoculars, and it, merges with the horizon or appears to dip beneath the horizon yet again, if you pull out a high-powered telescope on a clear day, then the ship will be restored yet again. So, this is perspective. If you look at any, say a row of equally tall trees going off in the distance, or if you're, leaning against a brick wall that goes off in the distance, what they're arguing here is that the trees or lamp posts that are all in a row and that are all the same height, or a brick wall that goes off in the distance, what they're arguing is that those objects are actually getting smaller and smaller as they gain distance from you, and it's not just an operation of perspective, which obviously it is. Objects appear to get smaller as they get further away from you, and furthermore, objects nearer to your line of sight, so say the hull of the ship, will appear, according to perspective on a plane, the hull of the ship will appear to merge with the horizon prior to the mass of the ship. Um, the mass of the ship will, vanish, in terms of the vanishing point, on the same datum line that the hull of the ship does, but further distant on that same datum line. So what that means is that the ship isn't going over a curve, it's just obeying the laws of perspective and appearing to get smaller um, as it gains distance from you. And furthermore, the bottom part of that ship will merge with the horizon or appear to dip below the horizon before the mass of the ship does. It's fairly simply depicted. This is not an argument that, this Christopher Columbus observation is not an argument, a cogent proof of a spherical Earth. It really is not. So anyway, that's what they claim. But you say ships do not submerge; they rise up again as they approach our view, except in Pirates of the Caribbean. I mean, I thought this was popular science, right? But no, this is popular culture, Johnny Depp movies. I don't know. But we are hereby assuming that was a fictitious movie. The reason ships appear as if they emerge from the waves is because the world is not flat, it is round. I've already covered this. Again, it's perspective. It has nothing to do with these ships going over a curve. Like I said, if you pull out optics, the entire hull will be restored, even if the entire mast has appeared to go over the curve. And unless binoculars and telescopes can see around corners or through impenetrable curves of water, then this doesn't make sense. And of course, the globular argument is then atmospheric refraction, but it doesn't account for it. Atmospheric refraction varies depending on the density of the atmosphere and the particulates in the atmosphere, but it doesn't account for it. So, uh, they liken this to an ant walking on an orange, what you would see if you watched an ant crawling towards you over a curved surface. And I would argue that the same exact thing happens on a flat surface. Okay, so I just wanted to quickly cover a little bit of point of debate that has been going on the last week or two, that in terms of lines of latitude on a spherical Earth, the equator would necessarily have a larger radius than, say, 45 degrees north. And it's been argued that that's not the case. No matter where you are on the sphere, the curvature would be the same. And so instead of arguing this, I did a simple experiment with the most spherical lemon I could find. And what I did is I cut it directly in half, and then using the same central axis as we do with the lines of latitude, uh, cut the lemon a bit closer towards the top. And what you'll find is indeed the smaller piece there would represent 45 degrees north or higher up than the equator, proving conclusively that on a sphere where you maintain the axis, which we do with lines of latitude again, and observe curvature going strictly east to west in this example, the curvature would be more obvious the further you are from the equator. Again, that's strictly east to west in this example. You could do it north to south, but it's just much easier to sort of describe and show with lines of latitude going east to west. So there you have it. We'll just go ahead and count the horse's teeth. We'll cut the lemon and see for ourselves that indeed the curvature would be more obvious the further north or south you are from the equator. So an object will appear even on a plane as it gets distant to you, more distant from you, it will appear to get smaller and smaller, more so closer to your line of sight. And the higher it is from your line of sight, or the more askewed it is from your line of sight, then the vanishing point will increase in distance. So imagine an ant walking on the surface of an orange into your field of view. If you look at the orange head on, you'll see that the ant's body is slowly rising up from the horizon because of the curvature of the orange. If you would do that experiment with a long road, the effect would have changed. The ant would slowly materialize into view depending on how sharp your vision is. So I guess they're saying that it is perspective. I don't know. Number 3, varying star constellations. Varying star constellations. One thing about constellations I'll mention is that the root of the word rings sort of like constant, as in not changing. So the constellations have never changed. And maybe that's not their argument. But the constellations have been the same throughout recorded history for many thousands of years. So they've got a picture here of a man standing, stuck to the side of a spinning sphere, uh, looking at some stars. The observation was originally made by Aristotle, 384 to 322 BCE, who declared the Earth was round, judging from the different constellations one sees while moving away from the equator. Oh boy. After returning from a trip to Egypt, Aristotle noted that there are stars seen in Egypt and Cyprus which are not seen in the northerly regions. This phenomenon can only be explained if humans were viewing the stars from a round surface. Aristotle continued and claimed that the sphere of the earth is of not great size, for otherwise the effect of so slight a change of place would not be quickly apparent. And this is, again, assuming the earth is a sphere. You get the same thing in a plane, a flat surface. Think of staring down a long hallway with lights on the top. And this is a bad example, but it'll illustrate the point. If you're in a long hallway and there's little lights stuck to the ceiling of the hallway, say it's those little sticky stars you stick to your ceiling, right? If you look directly above you, you're going to see those stars. If you look 100 feet down the hall, you're not going to see those stars. So if you take 50 paces down the hall, then you're going to see a completely different set of stars. Does that mean that hallway was spherical? Or you went around a curve? No, again, it's just perspective. Even though the plane upon which the stars all apparently adhere to in the flat Earth model, they're nowhere near as distant as claimed in the heliocentric model. Light years, trillions of miles away. That's hogwash. You can throw that right out the window. They're relatively close, and so it makes perfect sense on a flat Earth with stars that are nearby, relatively so, that you would see certain stars overhead in one location. And if you traveled, a couple hundred miles in any direction, especially I guess south, you're going to see other stars that you couldn't see from further north. This has nothing to do with the curvature of the Earth. It has to do with the plane of the stars adhering to the laws of perspective. So the further away from you, laterally, not overhead, assuming that the stars are all about the same altitude, you're only going to be able to see certain stars from one point. And if you travel away from that point, you're going to be able to see different stars, and you don't have to travel that far. works on a flat Earth too. This isn't proof of a sphere. If we assume the Earth is a sphere, then it suggests that it could be. But if we assume that the Earth is plane, then it works out exactly the same, as long as you understand that the stars are not, millions and trillions of light years away, or whatever the distances are. They're so far disparate in distances, it's ridiculous. It's never going to be proven, never going to be falsified, so it's exactly pseudoscience. Anyway, so yeah, they claim this phenomenon can only be explained if humans were viewing the stars from a round surface. Oh, Aristotle continued and claimed that the sphere of the earth is of not so great, for otherwise the effect of so slight a change of place would not be quickly apparent. Okay. So the further you go from the equator, the farther the known constellations go towards the horizon and are replaced by different stars. This is what would have to happen if the world was flat, assuming that perspective doesn't apply, which perspective applies to everything we look at, period. And I've mentioned this in a video, but the vanishing point on the ground is closer than the vanishing point on the astral plane, or where the stars are. But there still is a point where distant stars will appear to get lower and lower until they are merged with the horizon. It's just like anything else. Oy vey. Number 4, shadows and sticks. Ugh. Same old arguments. I mean, it's just the same old arguments that have been debunked. They use these arguments, assuming the Earth is a sphere, to prove the Earth is a sphere, therefore the Earth is a sphere, even though there's no curvature and it's not spinning. That's the only way that it would work in their model, being spherical. But hey, if you stick a stick in the sticky ground, I guess they're trying to be cheeky here, it will produce a shadow. The shadow moves as time passes, which is the principle for ancient shadow clocks. If the world had been flat, then 2 sticks in different locations would produce the same shadow. And they have this image here. Again, this is almost like debunking the video I did. I'll put a link in the description. Debunking Martimer81. It's almost as if he got his list of spherical proofs directly from Popular LIE-ence. But again, this image here is assuming that the sun is 93 million miles away, coming in at basically parallel lines, or perpendicular to the surface of the Earth. If the sun is much closer, which it is in the flat Earth model, and which it is in reality, whatever the sun may be, then instead of, if you've got the sun about here, just for argument's sake, then this shadow is going to be different than that shadow. And yet, if you take these same measurements, if they actually get into the math here, of, say it's high noon on the same meridian, you can plug the numbers into plane trigonometry, so assuming the Earth is a plane, and you get a distance to the apparent sun of about 3,000 to 4,000 miles, a diameter of about 35 miles, but I don't think that that's 100% accurate, again due to atmospheric lensing, but that's another argument. In the heliocentric model, assuming that the Earth is a sphere using spherical trigonometry, you get the bizarre, nonsensical, non-provable, non-falsifiable conclusion that the sun is 93 million miles away based on this experiment. Stick shadows on a flat Earth. Imagine the sun's rays represented by the yellow lines hitting 2 sticks, white lines, some distance apart. If the Earth were flat, resulting in the shadows, it would be the same length no matter how far apart you place the sticks. Again, that's assuming that the sun is essentially infinitely distant, with a wall of parallel lines light coming towards the sticks. Of course, we can show that to be totally fallacious. Sun rays converge towards a local sun. We've got videos of hot spots on the clouds directly beneath the local sun from high altitude weather balloon footage. The sun is not 93 million miles away. It's a local phenomenon. It's not nearly as far away as they claim, and so this whole argument is null and void, just like all the other arguments. Again, it's assuming that the Earth is a sphere to prove that the Earth is a sphere. But they don't. This is because the Earth is round and not flat, or so they claim. And so they've got, again, they've got the sun rays coming in at parallel lines to one another, when in fact sun rays converge to the sun, which is much closer. So the same observation can be extrapolated out in either model to gauge the distance to the sun. Or, to assume that the Earth is a sphere to prove that the Earth is a sphere, or to assume that the Earth is flat to prove that these observations can work in either model. But they are two totally different models. One with a very distant sun, being the heliocentric model, and one with a very nearby sun, being the flat Earth model. Right. Eratosthenes, 276 through 194 BCE, used this principle to calculate the circumference of the Earth quite accurately. To see this demonstrated, refer to my experiment video about Eratosthenes and the circumference of the Earth. I don't know if I necessarily want to get a copyright strike on this, so I'm going to skip it. We've heard it all before. Again, it's assuming the Earth is a sphere right off the bat. It's the only way that you get the conclusion that the Earth is a sphere with these observations. Seeing further from higher. I'm telling you, this is point by point, Martimer 81. I might as well just put a link to that video and end this, because I'm kind of tired, and I only wanted this to go about 10 minutes, and so far it's gone 40. I think my phone's going to die on me. Seeing farther from higher. Ride a plane if you're taking a trip out to the country specifically. And then, by the way, the seeing farther from higher is ridiculous. On a plane, when you raise an altitude, you can see further. If you're on a flat basketball court and get your face an inch above the ground, you can't see very far on the ground. If you get on top of the basketball hoop, you can see, for a much greater distance around you. That's because your field of view increases as altitude increases. It's very basic laws of perspective and optics and how our eyes work and how reality works. The Earth doesn't have to be a sphere in order to see further from higher. Ride a plane. If you've ever taken a trip out of the country, specifically long destination trips, you could notice two interesting facts about planes and the Earth. Planes can travel in a relatively straight line in very long time and not fall off any edges. What edges? They can also circle the Earth without stopping, so we're going back to circumnavigation, really. So popular science, what they're doing here, and it makes me sick, because again, these are the same arguments over and over and over and over and over again. But what they're doing is they're claiming that circumnavigation means we live on a sphere. Well, can you not go around in a circle on a plane, assuming that the magnetic north is in the center? If you head west and keep your compass needle pointed to the right, you're going to describe a circle on a plane. The Earth doesn't have to be a sphere to go around in a circle. Ugh. Number 7, look at other planets. No. We get fake images from NASA. The wandering stars are merely lights in the night sky that have a different apparent path than the stars. That's why they call them the wandering stars. But if we look at other planets, again, that's just the same thing as looking at the moon. It doesn't prove a thing about where we live. The lights in the night sky do not prove that the Earth is a sphere. But they say the Earth is different from other planets. That much is true. After all, we have life, and we haven't found any other planets with life yet. As if there are any other planets. We don't live on a planet, we live on a stationary plane that may not have any edges. It may go on to infinity, it may be expanding. The boundaries to our world may be superficial boundaries, as in the southernmost path of the sun in the southern winter. But yeah, aren't we very lucky to have life on this planet? So doesn't that sort of go against the Copernican principle? Isn't there something a little special about 1 in 9 planets? 1 in 9 ain't bad, right? Copernicus. However, there are certain characteristics all planets have, and it would be quite logical to assume that if all planets have a certain way or show certain characteristics, specifically if those planets are in different places or were created under different circumstances, our planet is the same. Um, Again, this is such a ridiculous argument. So when you go bowling, you can see a bunch of bowling pins at the end of the alley, right? So therefore, you must be a bowling pin, right? Same logic, if that's what you want to call it. I would call it broken logic, or I'm not going to say retardation, but it's about what it is. Sorry. In other words, if so many planets that were created in different locations and under different circumstances show the same property, it's likely that our own planet has the same property as well. All of our observations show planets are spherical, and since we know that how they're created, and I love how they say, since we know how they're created, as if scientists were there when all the planets were formed and they made documents and experiments and they have theories on how the planets were created, but in fact, they've got their heads shoved so far up their they think that we live on a spinning sphere in an infinite vacuum of outer space. So what does that tell you? They say it's also obvious that why they are taking this shape, unless we have a very good reason to think otherwise, which we don't, our planet is very likely the same. And I would say that the Earth itself has no even remotely close rival or anything remotely similar to it in the so called universe. The stars and the wandering stars are essentially local bodies, secondary features of the Earth. That goes for the sun and the moon as well. The Earth is a vast plane, the area that the sun travels around concentric with the North Pole in the sort of AE projection model. Um, that's where we're getting where our assumed lines of latitude and longitude is based on magnetic north and what the sun appears to be doing in cycles. But to say that that means that there's an edge, or to say that we can see what appear to be spheres in the night sky, therefore we must live on a sphere in the night sky is ridiculous. You couldn't possibly live stuck to the side of a spinning sphere. You couldn't possibly live stuck to the side of a spinning sphere in the vacuum of outer space without being fastly secured to the ground. And of course, theoretical physics says that it is gravity that holds us to it, and yet gravity cannot be detected, demonstrated, repeated. There is no evidence for gravity. Gravity has never been proven, and in fact, it's very easily debunked. I'll put a link to my playlist, Gravity Debunked playlist, because I don't want to get into all that. It's density and buoyancy. What goes up must come down is a cogent and obvious observation. Nobody's arguing that point. What we're saying is that gravity is not caused by the curvature of theoretical space-time. Space-time doesn't exist. That is a theoretical construct of Albert Einstein. And the Earth isn't spherical. Therefore, it is not warping space-time to create this inward pushing that is so weak that, it's the weakest of the natural forces according to them, yet it's strong enough to keep molecules of very disparate, very low density gases fixed adjacent to the vacuum of outer space. How does that work? Again, I mean, it's ridiculous. Uh, really, is there 8 more of these? The existence of time zones, that's explained on the flat earth. I would tell Popular Science to just look that up. I mean, do we really have to spoon feed this to everyone? They obviously are getting their information from the Flat Earth Society, which again is a shill campaign, misinformation, garbage. So I won't even bother getting into this because we all know that time zones work on the flat earth as well. They say that it can only be explained if the earth is round. If you assume the earth is round, it can only be explained if the earth is round. Another point concerning time zones, the sun and flat spherical earth. If the sun was a spotlight very directionally located so that light only shines in a specific location, if the world was flat, we would have seen the sun even if it didn't shine on top of us, as you can see in the drawing below. The same way you can see the light coming out of a spotlight on a stage in the center, even though you, the crowd, are in the dark. The only way to create two distinctly separate time zones where there is complete darkness in one while there's light in the other is if the world is spherical, and that is not true. I believe this has to do with an electromagnetic field generated from the central north. But again, one thing that I notice is lacking in all of these arguments, including Popular Science, is proof of curvature and axial rotation. I mean, they're going so far off into, astronomy and night and day, and how night and day wouldn't work on a flat Earth, when in fact night and day do work on the stationary plane Earth. But it's just so typical. I mean, that's just, we see this all the time. The center of gravity, this is number 9. I'm getting very tired of this. I'm sorry. Ugh. There's an interesting fact about mass. It attracts things to it, really. The force of attraction, gravity, being two objects depends on their mass and the distance between them. Simply said, gravity will pull towards the center of the mass of the objects. To find the center of the mass, you have to examine the object. This simply has to do with balance. They call it center of gravity, but it's a misnomer. It's just balance. What does that have to do with gravity? Dense objects are compelled towards the ground. Less dense, like bricks. Bricks will fall to the ground if released. Less dense objects, like a helium balloon, will not. It's just based on density and buoyancy. So if you've got a tray full of bricks, if you want to carry them in one hand, then you want to sort of balance them out and have the center of mass be balanced. The center of gravity is a misnomer. It says, consider a sphere. No, I'm done considering spheres. I really... Images from space. Oh, yes. By the way, you can't see the street lights from space. That's CG. That's a fake image. Watch the ISS live feed for a year, and you'll never once see this. This is fake. NASA adds this in later, and you've been tricked. So, I'm just going to end this here. I might add some clips and some thoughts into it, but I'm about to run out of tape. Can you believe this stupid smartphone? I hate it. Anyway, yeah, but this is Popular Science, and, this is where people go. They'll Google flat earth, and just to be fair, let's go back here. Let's Google flat earth. And yeah, it's the third one down when you look at it. And then, of course, you've got Wikipedia, modern flat earth societies, and it's, the top results that you're going to get is just discrediting the idea as not worth considering. And I would like to point out that's the opposite of science. And what popular science or popular alliance has done here is they have regurgitated all of the ridiculous so-called proofs of a spherical Earth. Um, where's their proof for curvature? Where's their proof for axial rotation? Astronomy doesn't work in the heliocentric model. We'd have a different set of stars every season, and over the years, even from summer to summer to summer to summer, we would have a slightly different set of stars. This doesn't have to do with the distance supposedly traveled, with the sun along the galactic equator, but it has to do with our angle of attack towards visible space, constantly changing because allegedly our axis of rotation remains fixed relative to the sun at a 66.6-degree tilt off of the horizontal, going around the sun at a 60-degree angle to the galactic equator. So again, if you think about this, visible space would be completely different stars from season to season. The moon would only be visible during the day for its waxing to no moon to new moon phase. Sorry, it's been a 16-hour day for me and I'm going to bed. Good night, y'all.